Hey, shipmate. Here's Sea Story. Let Billy, Commodore of the Freedom Fleet, tell you. Last we left off, Captain James Nicholson was cruising the Chesapeake Bay on his first day back in command aboard the frigate Virginia, which had set sail on her maiden voyage on 30 March 78. At midnight, she ran aground while trying to slip through the British blockade of the Chesapeake Bay under the cover of dark. Stuck there, she beat against the rock, causing her to leak and take on water, and even worse, lost her rudder just off the coast of Cape Henry, Virginia. At 3 a.m. on 31 March 78, a British squadron was cruising the Atlantic along the opening of the bay. Their squadron, consisting of the frigate HMS Emerald, captained by Benjamin Caldwell, the HMS frigate Richmond, captained by John Lewis Godoy, and their tender ships, the St. Albans, the Ariel, and the Seneca. They just so happened to be patrolling this exact section of the bay where the Virginia had run aground. Captain Benjamin Caldwell of the HMS Emerald reported the details to Vice Admiral Viscount in a letter on 3 April 78. I have the honor to acquaint your lordship of having taken the rebel frigate Virginia, of 30 guns and 150 knowing men. There was many more men belonging to her, but some were sick on shore and others left behind. At 9 a.m., the Emerald fired a 6-pounder at her, and the Virginia struck her colors without returning fire. 35 of the Virginia's crew were not entered into the prisoner of war musters on either the frigates Emerald or Richmond. However, it was reported that many men remained on board the Virginia to assist with repairs to the hull and the rudder, having joined the British service. To them, betraying the cause was seen as preferable to rotting in a prison ship full of famine, rats, and disease, which surely meant a slow and painful fate. Afterward, the Virginia was libeled and condemned. Libeled meaning she was presented before an Admiralty prize court, and condemned meaning the court ruled that she was taken captive as a legal prize of war. The Continental Navy frigate Virginia was pressed into service for the Royal Navy on 19 May 78, and to rub salt in the wound, they made her keep the same name. She would bear the shame of being captured for the rest of her service. The HM frigate Virginia had been hired at gunpoint, much like the Maryland men Captain Nicholson had impressed to order for him back in 77. The shares for her capture were divided among the ships Emerald, Richmond, St. Albans, Senegal, and Ariel, in accordance with the British prize system. How the British prize system worked is they would measure a ship's power level and use that number to determine their contribution to the capture of that prize. Their power level was measured by adding up the weight in pounds of all cannon on board and multiplying that weight by the number of her crew, giving the power level. Each ship's power level in the squadron is added up to give the total power level of the squadron. Then each ship would have their individual power level divided by the total power level of the squadron, and the resulting percentage would be the prize money that would be divvied out to each sailor in the form of shares. Even if a prize is pressed into military service, the government would buy the ships from the captors as an incentive. So that was the British perspective on the capture of the Virginia. They showed up and found her floundering on the rocks and gained a ship at the cost of 1 cannonball. However, there are 2 accounts from the American perspective on the loss of the frigate Virginia. They each come from Continental Navy officers who were both on board that fateful day. Captain James Nicholson, who escaped being captured, and Lieutenant Joshua Barney, who was taken as a prisoner of war and later returned to service in a prisoner exchange. 2 days after the loss of the ship, Captain Nicholson presented his defense to the Marine Committee of the Continental Congress. This will inform you of my misfortune in losing the Virginia at 3 o'clock in the morning on the 31st. I had weighed from Annapolis at 8 a.m. on the preceding morning and had taken advantage of going down the bay in company with a brig which had a pilot on board, supposed to be one of the best in the bay, to whom I had agreed to give 100, provided he carried me clear of the ground. The wind blew hard at northwest, and in every other respect it was a most favorable time, and although my tender was absent 19 hands, I thought it most advisable to proceed. At the above-mentioned time, she struck on the middle ground, and in about an hour and a half beat over it, with the loss of her rudder, and taking on as much water as we could well clear from her with 4 pumps, in which case we thought it was advisable to come to an anchor until daylight, when we found one of the enemy's ships about 2 gunshots off and abreast of us, with another ship further up the bay, on which I hoisted out my barge and took such of my crew as inclined to run the risk of getting on shore. 10 men, including myself, with the greatest of difficulty, got on Cape Henry, where I waited until 10 o'clock. When I saw the 2 ships, I immediately went to Portsmouth, got a boat, and came on board the St. Albans with a flag, in order to procure the parole of my officers, which I expect to accomplish. After which I shall proceed to Baltimore, and from thence shall immediately wait on Congress. Many years later, Lieutenant Joshua Barney later earned great naval fame in the U.S. Navy, serving as Commodore during the War of 1812, remembers it a bit differently in his autobiography. At daylight, we saw 3 of the enemy's frigates near us. We had passed them, and the loss of our rudder prevented us from getting to sea. And the moment Captain Nicholson saw the enemy, he ordered the barge to be hoisted out and left us. not waiting to take his papers or even the private signals with him in that manner, escaped on shore. So soon as he was gone, I ordered the anchor cable cut in order to run the ship on shore at Cape Henry, which could very easily have been done when being fair. But in this, I was overruled by the other lieutenant, who declared we could not approach the land, so that all I could say was without effect. The men gave themselves up, broke open the store and slop room, and got drunk. They would do nothing. I then cut the rudder away, which hung by its ropes, and at 10 o'clock, the enemy's frigate, Emerald Captain Caldwell, came on board and took possession of our ship. The next day, Captain Nicholson came on board under a flag of truce to inquire after his clothes, on which occasion I could not help upbraiding him with his conduct in quitting his ship the first man, who, if he had remained on board, there was not the least doubt that we could have run the ship on shore where she might have been destroyed, by which means preventing her from falling into the enemy's hands and saved 300 men from being made prisoner. However, Lieutenant Joshua Barney's account of the event came out in his memoir years later, so his words never made their way to the ears of the Continental Congress. Captain Nicholson's testimony was the only one on the matter, and he was acquitted of any negligence by a court of inquiry in regard to the loss of the Virginia. And Captain Nicholson was once again a captain without a ship. That's it for today. Tune in next time to learn the fate of Captain James Nicholson in Episode 4, New Beginning. War for Liberty needs you to do your duty. Hit the like button. Enlist with the Freedom Fleet by following and subscribing. Sail fast, fight hard, and God save the new nation.